Hey, everybody. So, what we're going to be talking about is some dirty little secrets that attackers know. And that's why we've made the talk, What You Don't Know Will Hurt You. So, let's buckle up. I'm going to be sharing with you some pretty interesting things that I've learned as a penetration tester and also as a defender. So, before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am. My name's Mick Douglas, and I'm a graduate of OSU. And I'm old school, as you can see, Douglas.67 at go.osu.edu. They're in the tens of thousands numbers now for the Douglases. So I've had that email for a very long time, and it's still active. So if you want to reach out to me, feel free to do that. So since I've graduated, I've had a very interesting and fun career. And one of the things that I'm really proud of now is that I've opened my own information security consultancy shop that I run out of my home office like everybody else does now in these pandemic days. It's called InfoSec Innovations, and we're a boutique security consultancy that shows people some interesting things and helps make novel defenses. And I'll be sharing with you some interesting ways of thinking about defense. In my quote-unquote spare time, I also teach for SANS, and I'm a member of the IANS research group. So I'm very passionate about InfoSec, and I do very seriously mean reach out to me, Douglas.67 at osu.edu. I'd love to chat. So I know it sounds a little weird to start with thanks, but I like to be a grateful person. And I want to say thanks to Rich Jackson for reaching out to me and inviting me to teach and share this stuff with you. And Brandon, hey, nice to meet you. He's the dude who's doing the AV, so thank you so much. I also want to say a big shout out to the group that I used to work with at OSU. Way back in the day, I had my first real Unix job at OSU. So it's near and dear to my heart, and also College of Arts and Sciences. Hey guys, I did it. And also thanks to my wife. So with all that stuff out of the way, let's get started on what you don't know can be used against you. So what we're going to be covering in these modules is I want you to understand how attackers think a little bit better, having a bit of an understanding of what they do and how they perceive the world helps make you be a better defender. And the one thing that, I'm going to show you some things that might kind of freak you out. I don't know. But I want you to walk away with hope, because there's always a way to mount effective defense. So what I want to do is start getting into that right now. Now, attackers, because they're bad men and women, are out there doing evil stuff. And so they cheat. And attackers really have a nice advantage, at least in the initial phases of the attack. They only need one way in. That's called the attacker's advantage. And unfortunately, what you don't know is going to be used against you. And so I'm going to try to explore some of the more interesting aspects of how attackers gain entry to systems. Now, I got to be honest, any type of a conversation like this, where I'm sharing with you how attackers think and what they do, would be missing content if I didn't talk about phishing. And I get it. I get it. You're probably tired of hearing about phishing over and over again. But the simple fact of the matter, the cold hard truth, is that phishing is how the ultra majority of attacks take place. And so, yeah, I feel you when you get that phishing email or the phishing training email that comes out every so often. You roll your eyes. I run my own security company. I'm a SANS instructor, for goodness sakes. I roll my eyes too. But that doesn't get me off the hook, and it doesn't get you off the hook. And I just want you to understand that given enough time and the right ruse, everyone falls victim to phishing. So what I want to do is let's get a little bit beyond phishing and talk about what happens after the phish. Because it's a foregone conclusion that attackers will leverage that advantage they need just one way in. And if they have 90% of the attack starting with the phish, cool, they get in, but then what? So what we're going to do is talk a bit about how attackers think and what they do, And then we're also going to give you a lot of hope on how defenders can defend and make life just living hell for the attackers. So what I want to do is, before we get into showing any attacks or talking about any evil, I want you to understand that you can mount an effective defense. And one of the reasons that I was really happy to accept the invitation to come speak is that my understanding is there's going to be some content talking about other analysis tools and capabilities that are becoming available to you all. And you really do need to take advantage of these, because the industry has shifted in a very interesting way. We can't anymore rely on traditional signature-based tools. We can't rely on normal, simple YARA-type IOC indicators. We need to move to a different mode. And part of the reason that we need to move to that different mode is there really is no such a thing as a secure system. It just doesn't exist. I've been a pen tester now for well over a decade, and I've gone against some of the largest organizations in the world. I'm fortunate enough to say that I've got a Fortune single-digit company as a client. I've worked and done pen testing against nations. I've never been kept out. And yeah, I'll admit it, I'm a bit better than average, but if you gave me a half hour, I could fill it with naming people who are more skilled than I. So, I'm above average, but I'm not that good. But if I can get in, what do you do against an apex predator who's really motivated? You're going to have to come up with something, and whatever that is, it's going to have to be pretty good. So the main thing that you need to do is start shifting your thinking. The attackers are going to get in. That's a foregone conclusion. If you say that we're making a system secure and then the attacker gets in, you look like a jerk. You lied to folks in a weird way. But if you make a system tamper-evident, when you say, hey, our systems are tamper-evident and it's been compromised, and we see that, you know what? The tamper evidence is working as expected. So this slide is probably the most important slide I'm going to be giving you in our short time today. So please take it to heart. If this is causing you some angst, feel free, Douglas.67@osu.edu. Feel free to flame me away and we'll have a conversation. So when I say things like tamper-evident, I want you to understand that this is real actionable things. This isn't just some pie in the sky like, oh, in an ideal world, you should be able to do this. No. Years ago, I used to work at OSU, and I understand what a freaking goat rodeo the network is. In fact, of my clients, university networks are always, by orders of magnitude, the most difficult ones to deal with. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you are techniques that will work on a network as absolutely chaotic and hostile as yours. One of the things that is really important that you understand is that there's no such a thing as a one-trick pony when it comes to information security. And what I like to do is a pincer move whenever I can, at least. And that's why I'm talking about doing network layer detections and host layer detections. An attacker can hide from one of those. Doing a variety of C2 techniques. I'll even be sharing with you one that's pretty stealthy at the very end of this talk. They might be able to hide at the network, but if you're looking at the host, there's observable things. Likewise, if the attacker is doing tricky things to hide at the host, chances are there's ways that you can detect them at the network. It's relatively easy to hide from one of those layers. It really is. The level of tradecraft that's required to hide from both as an attacker is seriously a totally different situation. So what I want to do is share with you a more approachable version of a scoring tool that I use and charge people a ton of money for. So please pay attention. This is consider this a gift, and I hope you use it. What I like to do is build excuse me. What I like to do is I like to build what we call a balanced scorecard. And the way this works is you build a simple grid. Now, you could go a lot more detailed if you want in terms of breaking down the different components at each layer. But at a very high level, it's really just this. 3 columns where you list what you have going on. So in this first column, you might fill it in with threat intelligence data, vulnerability scanning information, audit findings, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. That's very popular, and with good reason. It's a good resource. So whatever thing you're worried about, some attack, whether it's network-based or host-based, the latest, worm that's going on, latest ransomware, whatever, you would put that in that first column on the attack layer. Then what you do is you start filling in what controls you would expect the network layer to either prevent or at a minimum detect the attack that's taking place. Now, the beautiful thing about this is you probably already know some of your network options that you have. So use those, fill them in, and this is where you can start tailoring your defense and your notifications to the attacks that are happening. Likewise, you do the same thing at the host layer. You're going to list things, antivirus, endpoint detection response, etc. Even tools that are as, dare I say it, easy to get around is DLP, right? Anything that you've got that will help you mount the defense gets listed here. And then what you can do is fill in these different columns and start saying, hey, for this attack, I've got a pretty good network battle plan, but on the host layer, I'm kind of lacking. Maybe I need to skill up or tech up a bit on the host side. Likewise, if you're seeing that you've got a lot of detects on the host layer, but nothing on the network, it might be time to invest in some network capabilities. Now, the thing that's gorgeous about this and why I'm able to charge a premium for this to my clients is this sort of modeling opens itself up to really good science. All too often in InfoSec, if I'm being completely honest, what happens is there's a lot of, qualitative discussions. Well, now here what you can actually do is start making this a quantitative science. Hey, we said that, for instance, antivirus would detect something or stop something. Nothing's stopping you from actually doing a QA and doing, some of the demos that I'm going to be sharing with you in a little bit to see, does my antivirus stop or detect this thing as I expect? And the thing that I find deeply pleasing about this approach is that it somehow lets all the pressure and hype out of the assessment process. It allows us to actually manage our threats and rank them in a way that's meaningful and real. So we're going to start with a couple interesting demos, and I'm going to share with you how attackers will do what they do and how you could leverage that balanced scorecard technique against these sorts of attacks so that you can see how you would measure up. So what I'm going to do for each of these is give you a little walkthrough of what's going to happen, and then I'll do the demo. So in this case, we somehow have the attacker gets a local exploit on your system and has it run. Now, how it got there and how it's run, believe it or not, isn't that interesting from a pen testing or attacking standpoint. Maybe it was a drive-by download. Maybe it was a weaponized Excel spreadsheet. I don't know. But when the exploit attacks the system, it will then compromise the machine and then phone home into the attacker's system. Now, one of the things that's a little weird is not many people realize just how easy this sort of attack is to pull off. And what's even stranger is I want to draw your attention to this element right here. The directionality of this arrow in phase 2 is highly important. The fact that the arrow is going this way is a big indicator that makes life difficult for the defenders. In the real world, it is incredibly difficult for an attacker to attack into an infrastructure because firewalls are so prevalent. But what's interesting is that most firewalls allow outbound traffic. And the brutal truth of the matter is some of the most permissive firewalls I deal with on a day-to-day basis are ones in higher education. And I get it. I'm not blaming you. It's a very hard task to manage firewalls out. And, the idea of curtailing someone's academic freedom is a big problem. But what I want you to at least ponder is that just because a bit of data appears to originate from your network doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. So in the upcoming demo, what I'm going to do is share with you how attackers will do this sort of setup. We're now looking at a virtual machine, and on this system, this is one of the, just for cross-promotion's sake, I'm making use of some VMs that we use in SANS 504, which is a class of PHISH. And what I want to do is show you just how easy it is to have a Windows machine get compromised. Now, what I've done is earlier, and this is a little tedious and not the point of this demo, I've crafted a fake update file that I've put on my Windows victim machine. Now, this fake update file, this is, maybe there's a ruse that we somehow got the user to download. And what they're going to do is install this. Now, unbeknownst to the user, this isn't real installer. What it's going to do is do a phone home into the attacker's command and control infrastructure, which we're now going to set up. And one of the things that I'm going to do is highlight just how easy it is to set this sort of infrastructure up. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who believe that it's kind of difficult to do this. And what I'm going to show you is exactly the sorts of things that I do when I'm doing a pen test. Only variance is I may change and use a different tool. So, use exploit multi-handler. Now, the multi-handler is an exploit that comes with the Metasploit framework, which is an open source tool that allows you to attack systems and replicate adversaries. So then we're going to set our payload to Windows Interpreter. And then we're going to ratchet up the difficulty here for the defenders by using reverse HTTPS. Now, the reverse HTTPS module means that all traffic going back from the victimized machine to the attacker system is going to look like normal encrypted web traffic, which, that's not very fair, but it is the kind of stuff that attackers do. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do our show options to figure out what settings we need to adjust. And for this particular attack, really all we need to do is adjust the L host. That's the listening machine, the one that I'm running right now. And so I'm going to set L host to ETH0, which is a shortcut that sets my listener IP. So now when I do exploit, I now, on this machine, I'm simply waiting for my victim machine to connect in, and I'm going to compromise it. So watch what happens when I run this upgrade. Now, it should have already been compromised, and it is. I now have an interpreter prompt, and so now I can type a command like shell, and in a moment, you'll see that I'm in the directory where I ran that particular exploit. And I can simply move around the file system. I can do any manner of things that the attackers have. And it was literally that easy. And one of the things that many people don't understand is just how brutal the race is against the clock. Because what I can do is I've already got access to this machine. I can pull config files, or I can even do use a variety of post-exploitation modules to gather information and then exit. So it's a rough time for a defender when you're going against these sorts of things. But I do have some good news for you. So let's talk about how you deal with this reality. Okay. One, accept that you have to get faster. Okay. That's just a brutal truth. We all have to get faster. But what I want you to do is focus on where you can win and win well. There's a few things that would be interesting to observe. You know, at the network layer, you're going to be seeing some traffic going back and forth. Certainly that file didn't appear out of nowhere. So if it was downloaded from a sketchy domain, that could be something you could observe. And the command and control traffic, that ongoing session that I had, that also is observable. Is that from a part of the internet that's not so savory? So be on the lookout for unexpected downloads. These are probably your biggest things to look for. And I realized that when, having been in the field for a while, when folks hear a security practitioner say that, their eyes roll back in their head and they say, no way can I do that. Yes, you can. Here's the deal. You're not going to need to do this analysis on each and every desktop. But if I gave you 5 minutes to quick write down all the machines that you're worried about the attackers taking over, you would know. And that quick list that you even just were making when I said that, those are the ones you need to do this sort of analysis on. The other thing that we need to have a little heart-to-heart about is ongoing command and control traffic. I hate to say it, but C2 traffic is actually really easy to detect. Now, that's not the whole point of this talk, so I'm just going to throw that gauntlet down. And if you want to come bite me on that, Douglas.67@osu.edu, we'll chat. You can tell me that C2 is hard to find, and you'll be wrong. But I respect your right to be wrong. Now, where it gets really interesting from a defense on these sorts of things for any kind of missing patch or client-side download attack, like we just did, there's usually plenty of host security warnings. Things as simple as antivirus can be a great help here. And, you know, there's other things to be looking for. You don't have to look for the initial incursion. Give yourself a little more time. Start looking for weird processes or even changes that are happening on the machines that you aren't expecting. There's probably a good chance that you're doing change management. And if you're anything like me, you hate it. Change management is boring and painful, but it needs to be done because this is how I detect most of my attacks. This is how most of my clients call me for incident response. So I hope this helps you understand how a very fast and subtle attack can be very quickly detected. It goes a lot further, though. Attackers, as was just recently in the news, a national hospital system, I'm not going to mention them, they've gotten enough bad press, but the national hospital system got taken offline due to a ransomware attack. And if you're not terrified of ransomware attacks, you're not paying attention. And one of the things that I need to impress upon you is just how shockingly easy and fast ransomware attacks can be. So in this next demo, what I'm going to do is we've already established our community control infrastructure. We're now going to cause this victim machine to run a PowerShell script, which will encrypt files on it. And the thing that a lot of people do not understand about ransomware is that it's shockingly easy to write and all too often very, very effective. But I know this will be a scary demo for some of you, but the good news is you absolutely can win when it comes to ransomware. So what we're going to demonstrate here is how ransomware works. Now, for those who haven't played around with it, and if you haven't and you do want to start playing around with it, be very careful. It's some pretty dangerous stuff. What I've done is I've made a simulated ransomware utility that uses a very fast and light touch method of encrypting the data. And so what I'm using is the XOR function, and I'm passing a key to that the script has. And typically, attackers will provide a key that is unique to each attack so that they can provide the key when you pay the ransom. So when you're dealing with ransomware, one of the things that many people don't realize is that it's a lot faster and lighter touch on systems than you may think. And what I've got is a small demo of a ransomware that uses the XOR method to do the encryption. Technically, it's a bit of an encoding scheme, but I'm passing a key that if you don't have that key, you're not going to be able to decode it. So watch what happens when I run this utility, and you'll see that it very quickly runs through some files. And in a real world scenario, the attacker would suppress this output so you wouldn't see it. But what we end up with is what used to be a plain text file. Right here, this is a super special file that needs to be protected, becomes this locked bit of code. Now, a lot of people will key in on this equal sign and say, oh, well, it's a base64 string, which is true. It is base64, but it needs to be XORed against the same key. Now, just before the talk, I got a little embarrassing confession to admit. When I was playing around with this demo, it failed. And I'm not entirely clear where it failed or why, but what this demo was supposed to do is take the test file and lock it and then recover it. And unfortunately, it did not. So one of the things that you always need to do, and I think that this is an interesting lesson learned, is always know who you're dealing with when it comes to ransomware, because sometimes they won't give you a key, or maybe their codes mess up like mine was on this demo, and it can't decode. So not only are you out the data, you're also out whatever money you spent on the cryptocurrencies to pay the ransom. So always do your homework when it comes to ransomware. But when it comes to ransomware, I do have some good news. Ransomware is detectable if you know where to look and what to look for. So some things to pay attention to are odd drive maps. Many times what will happen is when ransomware detonates on a machine, rather than just being content with the existent drives that are already mapped, the ransomware will try to map other shares. And that's a really weird thing. Most people day-to-day use the same drive shares over and over again. To have a different drive share being used out of the blue is weird. And so too is it forced somebody to start mapping many drives all at once. Also, be on the lookout for odd upload, download, or transmit and receive on the data volume, because when people are encrypting entire file shares or folders, there's going to be a lot of traffic, and that should be something that's observable. Now, one of the key things, pun intended, to look for is the key that will be sent out when the malware detonates. one of the things that attackers need to be able to do is send a key to them that they will hold on to so that you can later decrypt your files. A more interesting and frankly disturbing trend is that some attackers now, not only will they encrypt your data, they will also exfiltrate and steal some of your data. And what they're doing is they're doing two things. One, they will furnish you that file as proof that, yes, we really are on the machine. And then two, if you fail to pay the ransom, they will post it onto places like Pastebin. And I don't know, I've not yet seen how this will play out, but I think in the educational community, that's going to be a very weird scenario when it happens. And it will. Because I'm worried about like what the FERPA implications would be of student data being posted in this manner, or, and Lord help you, from the like HIPAA high-tech side if patient data gets sent out. So it's a very weird moment in history when it comes to ransomware. Also, one thing to point out is when it comes to ransomware analysis, many people key in on malware domains. And that's true that attackers will use malware domains, but they do an interesting twist on them. Instead of it being a normal malicious domain, most often when they're doing these sorts of campaigns, it's a very young campaign. So be on the lookout for a domain that has been registered and goes live and is being used in, like, say, the first 30 days. That's just really weird. And that's one of the ways that I look at it. It won't yet be scored, which is an interesting indicator from threat reputation places. And it's a very young domain that could indicate that it's malware. One item that, and I'm going to put a little frown face here, many defenders, including Microsoft, will tell you to turn on file access audit logs to detect the presence of ransomware on your systems. And that is true. It will work. But if you're honest and you're a Windows admin or been a Windows admin of any length of time, raise your hand if you have cratered system performance by turning this on. I know I have, and I'm not proud of it, but if you turn on file access auditing too broadly, the machine will grind to a halt. So it's imperative that you make it more targeted. So don't do file access auditing across an entire drive. Instead, pick a particular folder within a share that you care about and do it for that one. Certainly don't do it against, an entire share, an entire network share. That would be horrible. And absolutely don't do what I did the first time I played with this, did it on C drive, because the Windows directory is being used too much. Other things to look for are odd libraries getting called. There's an interesting quirk that attackers have to deal with is they want to have as light of a touch on the network as possible. And that means writing very small malware. As a result, they usually are going to rely on libraries that are used on your own machine. So they'll load up different cryptographic libraries or different encoding libraries. And that's weird, like really, really weird. The number of applications that do that is a very limited number. And the ones that do will be doing it in a frankly boring way. Web browsers will call up the TLS libraries over and over again. That's about it. So if you see a web browser doing other libraries that they normally don't, you might want to investigate on that. But in all honesty, it's hard to do that level of tracking. I know. And that gets back to that little gut check question I had, who are the people that you would worry getting attacked with this? And those are the ones you need to focus that analysis on. Now, I don't want to cause a ruckus, but these two right here, the high disk and network usage and high CPU usage, this is probably the area where it's most inexcusable. And the reason that I'm, throwing a little shade, if I'm being honest, is that many organizations don't do enough stewardship of the fleet that they care for. And so if you have users that are having too much CPU issues, you want to know. Like, I mean, it might not even be ransomware. It could be crypto mining, of course. But, like, for goodness sakes, like, I want to take good care of my users. But after all, that's why I have my job. And if their machines are running hot and heavy every day, maybe it's time for them to get an upgrade. I mean, all joking aside, I don't know if y'all have looked at the system resources that Chrome or Firefox will put on a machine that's even a couple of years old. Have a couple of browser tabs open. You might need to do some hardware upgrades. So this is where good, proper IT hygiene and InfoSec join together. So start looking for these telltale signs. And honestly, that'll start flipping things. It won't be the mean old security sysadmin coming at them with a stick. You're going to be a friend who helps them get the appropriate hardware that they need. And maybe, just maybe, every now and then you'll detect ransomware or crypto mining going on that they don't know about. Now what we're going to be doing is taking a look at more quote-unquote exotic attacks. Now, if you're expecting like what you've seen in Hollywood, you know, where there's going to be all kinds of pew-pew lasers going on, well, that's not these demos. That's not these demos at all. Instead, what I'm going to be showing you are subtler attacks that adversaries do that are really, really tricky, that have caused mass panic issues with organizers of different defensive infrastructures. And so let's do a real quick recap since we had a short break here. Attackers almost always get in, again, often with phishing. But once they get in, things shift. Okay? We've talked about the attacker's advantage. There's also a defender's advantage. All we need is one way in. And on the little demos there, I gave you some pointers on how you could detect these sorts of things. You just need one detect to start the investigation, and then the red team loses. So as soon as the attack takes place, defenders have the advantage. So what I'm going to do is focus a little more on fundamentals in this scenario. Now, as a educational institution, OSU is dealing with tons of sensitive data. Earlier, I mentioned student data that would be protected by FERPA. I also mentioned about PHI that would be HIPAA and high-tech protected. So those are things that people readily think about. But there's plenty of other bits of data that the attackers go for that isn't sensitive in the traditional meaning of the word. Maybe they're trying to find passwords to steal so that they can log into environments or do other attacks, lateral movement, which we'll talk about later. So one of the things that I want to impress upon you is that attackers will often employ methods to find sensitive data that, and I hate to break this to you, that are actually superior to the methodology that we use for working with our own operating systems. And nothing prepared me for what I'm about to share with you. Okay? I was working a case, and the attacker infiltrated the environment and was able to steal tons of data. The thing that was interesting about it was how targeted they were and how fast they found it. And we were racking our brains out trying to figure out, was this an inside attack? How did they know to go after this sort of stuff? And oddly enough, the thing that proved to us that it was not an insider attack is that the data that was exfiltrated was from a variety of too many different compartments. There was no single person at that organization that had that visibility across all those different data silos. Just didn't happen. So what we came to the realization was that the attacker somehow was able to scan systems faster and easier than we thought possible and build out a detailed hit list of what data they wanted to get. And folks, what I'm going to share with you is something that the attacker did. Now, we're doing it a very slightly different way than what they did, but let me show you how this worked. Within PowerShell, you have the ability to access different APIs that you normally wouldn't be able to access. And there's a variety of PowerShell scripts that will enhance the capabilities of your PowerShell prompt. And one of the tools that I have is a fast discovery PowerShell script. Now, unbeknownst to most Windows users, there is a file indexer that is continuously running on your Windows machines. And in fact, you may have even noticed that it was running, but weren't entirely aware of what the indicator meant. Have you ever kind of walked away from a Windows machine or just kind of sat back and you'll see the hard drive light just kind of blinking away? You're not really doing anything. There's a couple of things that are happening in the background within Windows, but one of them is that there's a file index service that is making a catalog of every single file that you have on your machine and tracking certain keywords. The upshot of it means that if you are able to load in a tool that can do rapid discovery, here, let me show you what I mean by this. I've built a PowerShell script called getIndexedItem, and it allows me to have access to the Windows file index. And now, instead of searching the hard drive or a network share, what I'm doing is I'm accessing the indexer service and getting results that fast. In fact, when I started playing with this utility, I thought that my script was broke. But no, it's really as fast as it looks. The way you would do this is you simply do get indexed item. So get indexed item, and then you're going to do a filter. And the filter logic works kind of like SQL. And I realize that doesn't display with enough context. I'm going to write the command, and then I'll open up Notepad and show you the command here. I'm going to give you this command so that you can see it. So what we're going to do is run this PowerShell module that I loaded. By default, it's not loaded. This module isn't native to Windows. So what the attacker or somebody who wants to do this technique would have to do is get the PowerShell script that I just showed onto the system, and then they would use the import module command to load this PowerShell script into memory. And it's basically extending the capability of the PowerShell prompt. And now I can do get index item, and now I can use a query language to actually start interacting with this index. And one thing that's really lovely about this particular tool is it's really well authored, so you can do get help on this, and it will actually tell you some ways to interact with this. And this right here is probably my favorite way to work within PowerShell scripts. Just run the get examples, and it will start giving you the query language that you want to use to do this. And as you can see, there's quite a few examples because this is such an interesting tool and fairly powerful. As I mentioned, there's these APIs that are available that most people aren't aware of, but unfortunately some attackers are. And what I'm going to do is illustrate an API that is available on every version of Windows. This goes all the way back to Windows XP. is that Windows has this file indexing service. It's always running in the background at all times. And if you know how to interact with it, you can, as an attacker, start pilfering data, targeted data of whatever interests you, and do it at a lightning speed. And the thing that's interesting is you're not crawling individual files at a time. Little aside, those of you who are in audit and are trying to look for unstructured data that's on a machine that isn't, or at least that shouldn't be on a machine but is, you can use this technique. Again, reach out to me, douglas.67@osu.edu. The tool that I'm using for this is called get index item. Now, the thing that's lovely about this, it's a PowerShell script that's publicly available. Hardly anyone knows about this. But what you can do is you can do get help, get indexed item. And then I like to do the share window option. And then you can hit Control plus to make the text a little more readable. And what I like to do is just have it so I've got my cheat sheet right next to me. And fortunately, this get indexed item was really well documented. This is the inline documentation that came with this script. And it actually shows you how to interact with this. And while it does support a fairly complex query language that you can look for particular keywords across particular file types, etc., it's actually a lot easier than you may believe, because it can be as simple as get index item and then like password. And then this crawl pulled out from my own machine the occurrence of the word password. So if there's other sensitive things that you're looking for, you can find it here. And what's really fun is a lot of people see this and they're like, oh, well, surely this can do text and HTML is just another text. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that PDFs are not really just text files. This will index things like Word documents, even database files. So you saw how fast the results came back. The attackers know about tools like this. And so they're able to make a very targeted ransack of your environment real easy. So unfortunately, that brings up a whole set of interesting discussions. When I say rapid, I do mean rapid. The machine that I did that test on wasn't any sort of pared down VM. That's the teaching rate that I'm teaching from right now. So it's got several 100,000 files on it. And some of them just happen to have the word password in there. So how do you deal with this reality? Well, again, from the network layer, you're going to have to kind of start thinking again, is this machine talking to a part of the network that's a little less stable? The main indicator that I see is exfil happening via C2. And the good news about exfil over C2 is it's unbelievably noisy. So, some C2s are a little tricky to detect, but C2 exfil is very, very noisy. So that gives you a little hope. One item that I do want to talk about, though, is this, and this gets really uncomfortable discussion. I shared with you the story of the client of mine where the attacker was doing this sort of analysis and stealing huge amounts of data quickly and efficiently. Unfortunately, they weren't really stealing it. What they were doing is they were taking some data, but they were actually adjusting other data. So if you are, say, a researcher, which some of you watching this are, or maybe you're supporting researchers, attackers can find the sensitive data and alter it very quickly using this technique. So be on the lookout for this. One of the ways that you can detect at the host layer is odd API use. Not many people know about, say, the Windows file index. Not many people know about the indexing systems on Mac OS or Linux. And so if people start playing around with those, that's odd. And you would want to key in on that. And I realize that nobody's probably told you to look for those things. I get it. But if you're worried about this kind of attack, this is the sort of thing that you need to start giving some, attention to. Also, be on the lookout for unexpected PowerShell commands. The good news is detecting unexpected PowerShell commands is easier than ever. PowerShell, by nature, is very, very noisy, especially with version 5 and above, because we now have script block logging. You also have transcripts that are available. And one of the things that I want to point out is that you actually can enable transcripts on people's PowerShell and use that to track the commands that they entered and the output they receive. So PowerShell is much more visible than ever before. Now, what security conversation would it be if we weren't talking about lateral movement? So lateral movement is the process by which attackers will try to attack other systems. And they usually do this over ports and protocols that you are expecting to see and deal with. Now, one of the things that's really shameful is just how slow organizations are to key in on this. Now, I do want to say, in many organizations' defense, the use of expected ports and protocols makes it a lot harder to detect because they're going to be blending in like normal. And so what I want to do is set up a demo with you and show you how SMB works and how fast it can be. Now, one item that we need to explore here is that attackers won't do lateral movement unless they have to. If the attacker can directly go to this target system, they would. But maybe there's a firewall or some trust relationship that they don't have. In that case, what we need to do is make it so that they, because they're blocked, they have to go through through a relay point, much like we wish all of our flights, when we're flying again, we wish all of our flights were direct, but sometimes we have to have layovers. So too with this technique. Now, one item to point out is that usually when attackers are doing this, real attackers, the skillful ones, the ones that keep me up at night, when they do this, this is usually the second attack wave. Usually what they will do is they will do a phishing campaign, get in, learn about the environment, and leave and be gone. What's more interesting to me is that a lot of attackers, when they leave, they do reconnaissance on how your environment is set up, and then they will automate the attack where possible. So what I'm going to show you is just how fast I can make this attack take place. And one of the things that's going to be kind of weird is in this demo, it's going to happen so fast that you're probably not even going to see what took place. So buckle up. This is a scary demo. I said that these attacks can go fast. And one of the items that I love to share with people is that Metasploit supports a automation component called run control files. And if you want to start playing around with Metasploit, you'll want to absolutely take advantage of them. Now, I realize that some of you are not going to be embarking on the offensive side of information security, and that's fine. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail of how RC files are generated and like walk you through all the intricacies. But I will say this, it's actually not that hard. What an RC file is kind of like a batch command where you just simply put one command after the other. And what you do is just stack them into a run control file, and then you call them like this. You do msf console, and then R, and then I've made a past relay demo. So if all goes well, we will get our connection in. Okay. And there we go. We've got our interpreter shell. Now, if I do shell, I am now on the machine. So that's literally how fast it can be if you build the run control files. So let me go back to the presentation, though, and talk about this for just a second, because I want you to understand just what happened here. So step one, I launched Metasploit on this machine, including the run control file. It established a command and control session with this machine over HTTPS. And then step two, it backgrounded the interpreter session and then used this really as just a relay. If you've ever done anything with like SOX proxy or any kind of network proxy, it just starts flowing data through there, basically. And now what I can do is, the effect is that I'm launching the exploits from here on this machine at step two. And then once I had that relay set up, I went ahead and made the connection to this system that I couldn't get to, and did that using the PSExec attack, which I'll admit that's kind of an old attack, but it's still dynamite. And it, because SMB is allowed a lot of places, PSExec is probably going to still be around for quite a while more. And so now that's how fast those sorts of lateral movements can take place. As soon as I typed the shell, I was already on this machine at that point. So I know that that's pretty sobering, right? Like, a lot of people think that attacks take a good length of time, and to be fair, the reconnaissance does, but when it actually comes time to pull trigger and make the attack work, it's oddly fast. So some things to think about. How do you deal with this? First of all, your main detect at the network layer is look for odd host interactions. And most importantly, what we want to draw your attention to are host-to-host interactions. I don't know. I wouldn't presume to say how your network is configured, but typically you don't have machines, workstations chatting with one another. Instead, it's workstations that are talking to a server, and they'll be working on files or working on a project together. And, both machines are talking to that one server. Okay, that's more normal. So you could look for machine-to-machine interactions. And I know that we're talking about SMB, but I'm about to make it go a whole lot nastier. I'm going to show you how you can leverage other protocols for this. So the main takeaway from this is that you really have to understand what is normal in your environment. Be on the lookout for unexpected processes, unexpected commands. But honestly, the way that I detect most of these attacks is I'll see a weird config change take place, and then I start doing forensic analysis, doing a deep dive on the logs. I wanted to kind of end with a bit of a shock and awe here, and so I will. What I want to do is dial up the evil a bit and show you how lateral movement can be done using RDP protocol. Now, RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, is probably the most popular way that you talk to a Windows machine. And Microsoft suggests that you use jump boxes to limit access to the protected servers in your environment. So in this demo, what I'm going to do is show you how an attacker can weaponize the copy-paste feature of RDP that allows a remote machine to copy and then paste into this other machine. Now, I want to be clear about this. I am not suggesting that you disable copy-paste capability within RDP. I mean, maybe you do that. I don't know. That's on you. But what I'm trying to illustrate is just to what lengths the attackers will go to cheat. And so what we're going to do is set up a system where I'm listening for copy events on my one OS, and then I will paste. I will have a listener that's running on the paste side, and then I can start attacking the infrastructure. So buckle up. This is a scary, scary attack, but as ever, I'll give you plenty of good details. This is something that I actually did on a pen test, and while I can't definitively prove it, I think that this technique was used by an attacker because there was a chunk of the analysis where we were following the flow of the command and control and data as it was moving through the network. But then we saw that there was just RDP connection between an administrator's machine and a jump box, like you would expect to see. And we kept on thinking that there was something that we were missing, or maybe that the NetFlow tools or firewall logs were misconfigured. And after a good amount of research, we started thinking that maybe somebody had weaponized RDP in an interesting way. And so what I'm going to do is recreate that with you. Now, there's tons of ways that you can make this work, but what you would have is an RDP connection already instantiated. Now, I want to be clear about this. You have to have that RDP connection because remember, the attack traffic and the response traffic is going to be flowing over copy and paste, the clipboard that's going through the RDP protocol. So there's this data channel that is not used for like mouse and keyboard events. It's the clipboard. And what I'm going to do is walk you through how this works, okay? So this terminal right here, this one that I've just moved, this one is our jump box. And what I'm going to be doing is running this PowerShell script, the RDP clipboard network socket. Got an idea for a nicer sounding name, definitely let me know. It's a little bit of a mouthful. It's going to be running in listen mode, which means that it will receive the command and control traffic off the clipboard that comes off of the RDP connection, which this is, I don't know, like I can't tell you how bizarre this is, but it's going to be taking the data off the clipboard and then putting it into our destination socket. In this case, we're sending it to the SSH port on this destination IP address. Now, I'm not going to hit enter just yet. It works best if they're started fairly close together. I don't have as much resiliency in the script as I would necessarily like yet, but it'll get there. And then on the attacker machine, what we're going to do is run the same script, but with a couple different options. We're going to set it in client mode, and then we're going to have a local listen port of 2222. Now, this could literally be whatever port we want it to be, okay? This is a local port that we will point our network tools to, and the data, I can't not laugh talking about this. The data is going to go from that port on the local machine and be put into the clipboard of our host and then pushed down the RDP connection where it was received by this listener. Now, one thing that I will point out, when I run these commands, you may see that periodically there will be a command being given indicating that there's a resynchronization taking place. That's a troubleshooting item that I've got because the clipboard was not designed for this. I mean, that's probably the understatement of the day. And what will happen is periodically the clipboard gets a bit confused and there's a synchronization element that's going on there. I will be watching that. If there's a resync that's happening both at the same time on both the client and the listener, the connection may drop. We'll see. I don't know. So with all that said, I'm going to start these, and then what I will hopefully do, and this sounds really weird, but what I will do then is launch the PuTTY SSH client, and instead of connecting to the desired machine directly over port 22, what I'm going to do is connect to my local host on port 2222. The SSH traffic is going to be temporarily put into the clipboard, put down that RDP connection, then received off the RDP connection clipboard, and then get relayed over to the next host. Fingers crossed this works. Let's see. Okay. Nice. Okay. Oh, all right. We already had one of those resyncs that Okay. Well, we'll see how this goes. Fingers crossed. Okay. So we're going to start PuTTY. And again, here, instead of, I'm getting a little nervous about how often this is syncing. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect to localhost on 2222. And if all goes well and I hit open, I will get prompted with an SSH connect. So let's see here. Yeah! All right. Yeah, we do. And yes, I do want to connect to this. And so let's see. 4. And there we go. Connected in. So that actually worked. Yay. So that is how you do a relay over RDP using the clipboard. Now, is that janky? Yeah. Actually, I'm going to come clean through the magic of the fact that this is being recorded. Both Reg and Brandon were very kind to suggest that we pause the recording and allow me to reconfigure things because I was having some weird network issues. So thank you both for your attention and kindness there. But now, at this point, I can do literally like whatever I want on this target machine. Now, let me stop here for a moment and go back to the presentation. And I need to explain like what this is all about, why you would do this, because this is really messed up. It really is. Now, first things first, let's talk about detecting it. And then we'll talk a bit about more of why it is the way it is and how it works. Okay. So I want you to look at this slide and hopefully go back and watch the other parts. This is recorded, so you can go back and rewatch. Each of these things that I'm illustrating, yes, it is a specific tactic, but there's a strategy behind them. And here the strategy is I am piggybacking a known good protocol using just things that are already in your network. You've already got PowerShell, you've already got RDP, and the thing that I want you to take from this is that attackers who are highly motivated and a little bit creative are going to do really weird things that you don't expect. And detecting this is tough. And, if you try to do this at the network layer, I legit, this would be a very tough thing to find. So you could look inside the RDP protocol and see copy-paste use. In the real world, this is 100% unreasonable. So, yes, technically you can do RDP inspection and look for odd artifacts in the copy-paste. If you are, congratulations. You are doing a level of defense that nobody else that I'm aware of does. So you could potentially do this in terms of a forensics investigation, where if you had suspicion that a machine was engaging in such shenanigans, you may want to turn on full packet inspection. But RDP is one of those protocols that is almost never done with full packet inspection because there's so much data there. So this is kind of a real nasty thing for an attacker to do. What you could potentially detect that has a little bit more of a likelihood is at the network layer would be an odd volume. One of the more interesting artifacts that gets introduced when I do these attacks is that if I am moving any amount of data, like say I'm infiltrating a file or exfiltrating files, that volume starts becoming noticeable because the normal ebb and flow of RDP, especially on jump boxes, which typically have a fairly small color palette set up, when you do these sorts of tricks with moving files using this technique, it looks weird. Like the volume of bytes received and bytes sent within the time frame is going to be much higher than others that are doing similar work, which brings to one of my favorite and easiest detects, which is top talkers by protocol. So if you were to do a most bytes sent, most bytes received for RDP, once you eliminate your jump boxes, which you would expect to be doing the most of that, once you eliminate your jump boxes, you will find that there's a very sharp line of delineation. And if somebody has a very high volume amount, best case scenario is they're running at a way high of a resolution, and you'd want to fix that anyway for performance reasons. But most often, you can catch people that are copying and pasting files. And that's one thing that I neglected to mention that I'll hint at on the next slide, okay? When you are moving a file using copy-paste, you can do that. And there's really no finite file size limit in terms of how much of a file you can copy and paste across this RDP method. So, be aware of that. Now, what I did was I twisted that. It's meant for moving files or moving, say, a password from your password vault. I've twisted that and actually was putting network data on there, which again also would cause an odd volume. The only reason I'm harping on that so much is this attack really, the end result of this is the attacker is taking the network detect away. You just don't get that. In a real world environment, I don't know people who can do that. I'm not saying that you should give up on the network analysis. What I am saying is these sorts of attacks are very tough. And that's why when I tell you that you need to look at unexpected commands, look for them, like unexpected processes on your jump box, look for them. And this one is the most interesting, is unexpected attacks. Most protected environments, when they're behind a jump box, are not going to be receiving the same kind of attacks that other systems in your environment would get. It's the whole reason we have jump boxes. What this attack does, what this technique does, is turn your jump box into a proxy for the attacker. Let me show you how that works. If the attacker has their attack tools on their system right here, and they're on a hardened jump box with no attack tools, an attacker who's dedicated and serious is not going to just frown and say like, oh, I guess it's time to be legitimate. I'm gonna, be a model citizen. And they're not going to do that. They're hardened criminals. So what they're going to do is they're going to get creative and they're going to do things like what I showed you. And what you do then is on your system, you set up your local listening port and shove that data into the clipboard, which then gets sent down to the RDP traffic, gets received on that system, and that system watches the clipboard effects. Now, I do want to point out the clipboard was never designed for this kind of I/O, and that's why there's these little resyncs. Like if we hop back to the VMs, I'm sure if the connection's still up, I'm sure that we're still having resyncs. And yeah, we're seeing that. So that's an artifact of this being a somewhat fragile way of getting data to a system. But here's the deal. I'm doing it because I have to. I have no attack tools on this machine that I can really use, or the attack tools that I want. And so what I'm going to do is turn this jump box into my jump box. And at that point, what I'm going to do is then attack with anything. Now, this bit here is really key. Most people, when they think of cyber threat intelligence or threat intelligence, they think that getting external resources is good and helpful, and it is. I want to be very clear. Now, whether you go commercial or open source, I'm not going to get into that debate. But one item that you do want to point out, or that you do want to take note of, is right here, this getting attacked with attack tools that are unreasonable for this environment. That's something that you should pay very, very careful attention to. Fortunately, the scenario where I shared earlier, where we were able to follow the attack except for that RDP hop, the reason that entire scenario started unschooling is one of the SOC analysts said one of the protected database servers was receiving a fairly commodity attack. And much to my chagrin, I'll own it, I was like, yeah, that's a common attack. It's no worries. Let's move on. And the SOC analyst said, but Mick, they're in the protected network zone. They can't receive those attacks unless it's coming from the jump box. And I said, well, yeah, okay. And then they showed me the log of the attack. It was coming from a Kali Linux machine. So that was weird, like really, really bizarre, because there were no Kali machines in that environment. So we started peeling away until we found out what was happening and started making some informed analyses based off of that. Now, what's interesting is this. That threat analyst, the SOC analyst, who saw and understood what was happening, they're worth their weight in gold. And the key thing that you need to remember is you need to know your environment such that when attackers do their attacks, and they will, they're leaving those footprints. And those footprints are gifts to us defenders so that we can detect what's going on. And I guess the short way of talking about that is everybody loves cyber threat intelligence, but oddly enough, almost nobody builds their own cyber threat intelligence based off of the telemetry they receive every second of every day. Your network should be telling you how the attackers are attacking. Respond to it. And go way beyond just blocking firewall ports. Learn from how the attackers are gunning for you and start adapting, because otherwise they're going to keep on doing these attacks and move on to softer spots in the network. So a couple things to remember before we close our time together is if you are basing all of your defenses on prevent, it's not going to work. In fact, prevent-only defense never, ever works. If you go all the way back to medieval warfare, the best win condition for a walled city was that they outlasted the siege. And frankly, I'm glad I live in these times, because the idea of siege warfare sounds horrible. So get away from thinking that you can prevent your way to victory, because even back then, prevent defense was horrible. You need to start learning. And detection-based defense is what wins. And, I realize that some vendors have oversold the capabilities of SIEMs and various network IDS, IPS systems, various endpoint detect and response tools at the host layer. But you know what? Behind all that hype, there actually is some legit good use. There is some legit good telemetry that you can get. So leverage that. And I hope that I've helped explain to you a little bit about the creativity that attackers have in terms of how they approach things. If they have a jump box that is really hardened and they can't get their tools over to it, they're going to hack. Hackers are going to hack. And it's up to us to start thinking more creatively as defenders. I don't mean to be a jerk in our closing, but, as defenders, we like to make fun of I was going to say skillless, but maybe lower skilled attackers. We call them script kiddies. I hate to say it, but there's a lot of script kiddie defenders too. And I realize that we all have a very busy life. We all do. But what I challenge you to do is try to get better. Wherever you're at on the continuum of skills, get better. Just a little bit. I'm not asking everybody to quit their main thing and, just focus on defense. But, have a little more awareness. Use your home court advantage. One of the things that makes me just so sad about the incident response cases that I work is that the attackers are in the environment for months, sometimes years, and they've exfiltrated gigabytes or even terabytes of data out, and the defenders have the audacity to say, how would we have known? No, that's not acceptable. And the part of the reason that I'm so riled up about this is I don't know if you're aware of it, but everyone who's watching this, your job matters. It really does. Because I got into computers because, frankly, I thought they were fun. I studied telecommunications at Ohio State because phones were fun. I loved computer networking. It was fun. But you know what happened? Geopolitics came to my hobby. And now, if I do my job well, I'm literally helping my clients, and I'm also helping you, because my clients won't be jumping points into your network. Likewise, your network won't be a jumping point into mine. We're in this together. And frankly, the people who are trying to do harm online right now are really evil people. I've worked cases of human trafficking, espionage, drug running. And I hate to say it, but your job matters in a way that is incredibly visceral. And I realize it's a very heavy burden that I've placed on you. I'll be honest, there's days I'm not this worked up. I'm feeling a little more salty because of the recent ransomware attack that took place against the healthcare sector that likely cost a couple lives. So whether you're a sysadmin, a developer, or even just an end user that is, just using their computer for regular work, you're all under attack all the time. And I got bad news for you. It's never going to let up. So what you have to do is lean into it. And I get it. I started off the talk talking about how, phishing. Everybody hates phishing training, but you know what? You got to do it, because the cost of not having that vigilance is that you're going to be the pawn in somebody's game. And I run my own company. I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say that there were days that I kind of phoned it in, right? I'm not super computer vigilance man all the time, but I do want you to understand that the table stakes are a lot higher than you've been told. You need to take this seriously because your adversary is taking it seriously. I have given you training that the balanced scorecard thing, I charge a shameful amount to corporations to show them how to do that. Please leverage it. They can't get enough of that, and I hope you get good value out of that, because it helps make it so that you have a chance to win. We're in this together, all right? Best of luck. Go Bucks. See ya.